not going to ignore you over there.
Ignore me, that's fine.
Are we still waiting?
I think we are...
Ready to go?
We're good, whenever you are, Kayla. Kayla Smith, take it away when you're ready.
Hello everyone, my name is Kayla. I'm an interdisciplinary studies major focusing in public health advocacy. Before I start, I do want to do my acknowledgements. I don't have a slide for my acknowledgements, I was just going to say them. So first, thank you to Carrie Sauter, my advisor, who has been a rock throughout the entire process of me being a mess of a person. Thank you to Dr. Hussey, who's here, my political science advisor. Dr. Violet couldn't be here, he's my English advisor because my writing sometimes needs to be supervised. And thank you to the IDS department in general for being super accommodating and super great and being really awesome and understanding, because this has been a doozy of a semester. So let's get started. We're talking about contraceptive use, so healthy retrievers, sexual health interventions, and condom use on college campuses. Yes, this is the shape of a phallus. So to begin with, every 2 years, University of Maryland, Baltimore County does a survey for the National College Health Association. And we can see kind of a trend, well, I'll talk about why it's not a trend. But in 2013, the preferred use of contraceptive as male condoms was 64.9%. In 2015, it went up to 67.4%, which is great. But that's just the preferred use. How many students actually used the condom in the last 30 days went down from 6.7% to 6.3%. That's better than the reference group, which is just the national average for all of the colleges who take the survey. But I want you to keep in mind, when you think about science and looking for a trend, usually that takes a long time. But in public health, you can't really wait for a trend to establish itself because people can get hurt. So when you think about STIs, why does it matter if students aren't using condoms? Why does it matter if students aren't using contraception? Because young people, ages 15 to 24, are most at risk for contracting an STI. And if you don't know that you have an STI or you're not getting tested, you could risk sterility, you risk even just discomfort, but it can get really, really bad. So we want to make sure that we're keeping our students healthy and protecting themselves. So my question is, what kind of interventions would be most effective in increasing the use of external condoms in college-age students at UMBC? How can we come up with something to convince students to use more external condoms? I'm calling them that because male condoms is trans exclusive, so I want to make sure that we're keeping our intervention as inclusive as possible. So where do we start? I'm using bridging the explanation action gap. What that means is starting with using multiple disciplines to define the problem and using multiple disciplines to try and intervene with that problem. So I'm using sociology and psychology to explain the problem while using social work and health psychology to create an intervention. So you have to start with understanding the barriers. Why aren't students using external condoms? So using sociology and psychology, we can really boil down the reasons to 3 specific categories. In sociology, there's stigma associated with sex and condoms. That's talking about the taboo of sex, people not wanting to talk about sex, people feeling uncomfortable talking about sex and the use of condoms. It also looks at gender roles in relationships. So think about women who don't want to offer the use of a condom because they're worried that their partner will think that they're easy or that they're a slut or something of that nature. There are also men who feel that they can't use condoms because if they don't know how, they're going to embarrass themselves. And that's what brings us into the psychology of self-image preservation. People want to avoid being embarrassed, they want to avoid being unprepared, they want to avoid looking like they don't know what they're doing. So instead of being clumsy and fooling around with the condom, they just decide to not use it at all. Once you understand the barriers, what do? You have to come up with an intervention. In health psychology, there are the 10 prescriptions for creating an effective intervention. I'm not going to go through all 10 because that would be ridiculous. So we're going to focus specifically on basing your intervention on a theory, intervening at the appropriate level, and targeting the correct audience. My interventions will cover all 10 of these different prescriptions, but I'm not going to make you listen to every single one of them. We have 12 minutes. So the disciplines I already talked about a little bit, but as far as the intervention goes, we're also using social work and health psychology. The models that I'm using for my intervention are the health belief model, trans-theoretical model, and strength-based interventions. It sounds like there's a lot of models to deal with, but each one of those models targets a different aspect of the intervention. The health belief model talks about where your students are mentally. Are they aware that STIs are a problem? Do they know that there are consequences to having an STI? Do they know that their behavior can reduce the severity of an STI? So you start with understanding the mindset of your target audience. So that's where health belief model comes in. Next, using sociology, there's the trans-theoretical model. So understanding what stage of development your audience is in. Are they not ready to accept an intervention? Are they ready to accept an intervention? Are they in the position where they can be active in using the intervention that you present to them? So understanding that aspect then leads you to the strength-based intervention. If you know where your audience is mentally, if you know what stage they're in as far as the stages of change, you can then use the strengths in your immediate community to intervene in the problem that you have. So using things that we already have on campus, like Bedside University. Some of you might know what that is. You might have seen me present in one of your classrooms. It's a subsect of the National Campaign to End Unplanned Pregnancy. They work on promoting use of contraception on college campuses. That's run by peer health educators in the Health Promotion Office. So we start with a social media campaign. Quick fun thing. This tweet from UHS, that is the last time in 2013 that University Health Services tweeted something explicitly about condoms. Since then, they have maybe retweeted something about a presentation or retweeted a promotional tweet for an event that's held on campus, but the last time that the university actually stepped in and said something was 2013. These are tweets by Bedsider, which is something I just mentioned, that promotes the use of contraceptive, especially male condoms, in a platform that younger students can find more accessible. It's more comfortable, it's usually people their own age, so college-age students are more likely to take an interest in what's being said. So using Bedsider, peer health educators, and University Health Services, if there's constant sharing of inclusive and all-inclusive information related to sexual health on Twitter, UMBC, Facebook, and Instagram, you're more likely to get a young person's attention, if it's done right. Next, access to internal condoms. This goes back to the original discipline we talked about with self-image preservation. College-age students tend to be embarrassed by getting condoms. Think about where you have to go on campus to get them. Just like for a second, you have to go to the front desk of your res hall, right? Where desk staff is staring at you and knows your name and looks at your red card. Or you have to go to University Health Services where there are doctors staring at you and you're like, why is that person looking at me while I try to take this condom out of this dispenser? So you're trying to maintain a certain level of professionalism or maintain a certain image. And if you have to grab a condom for a normal use, but you're worried that someone's gonna look at you, maybe it would be in the university's best interest to have more discreet places for students to have access to contraceptives like nail condoms specifically. So these are just some ideas. Condom dispensers in residential halls instead of at the front desk, dispensers in bathrooms which are a little more discreet, or condom maps. So students don't have to ask around, where do I get this? They can just find a resource that will tell them this is where you can go. Next, starting a conversation. So using that strength-based approach, using what we already have, peer health educators, and constant programming. The only two constant programs that target the use of contraception are the Condom Cake-Off and Trick or Treat Between the Sheets, which are two programs that are run by the Health Promotion Office, which were started and facilitated by me. And God willing, I graduate in May, so there's no telling what happens to those programs after I leave because I flagship them. So those are the only consistent programming that we have that isn't institutionally based or that the university doesn't have us do. So that's what's missing, is the institutional intervention of students actually using male condoms. There's the individual basis, there's the organizational and relationship basis of the peer health educators doing something, but the university doesn't. So these are just mock-ups for posters that could be put up by the university, resources that could be put up. Think of the big banners that you see in Commons. If the university showed more of an explicit interest in telling students that they need to be using contraception, there may be more of an opportunity for students to feel like they have to. I also want to be very clear that this poster here has two women because the interventions need to be inclusive. That is one of the 10 prescriptions to be culturally sensitive. Now when you hear culturally sensitive, you might think, okay, so we're talking about different ethnic races, different ethnic groups. But research has shown us that the more millennials go through college, the longer you're in college, the less likely you need to actually adhere to whether or not someone is black or white or Muslim or Christian. Students now, millennials and college-age students, generally take their advice about contraceptive use from their friends and their peers, which is why it's important to implement these interventions at the level of being in the university. And consistently, so not just when you're a freshman, not just when you're a sophomore, not every other year, every year consistently so that the message is also consistent. These are references if you didn't see them throughout. But why does my research matter? I implore you to ask yourself this question if you have kids or if you plan to have kids. Would you trust your child's friends to teach them about condom use? The answer is no, and intervention is still relevant. There's research done for the barriers to why students don't use contraception. There's research done to the preferred methods of contraception. And there's separate research for what kinds of interventions work for college students. But there doesn't seem to be an implementation of that research at UMBC specifically, which is why this research matters. If we see the declining use because of the NCHA, and we see the declining use in students not using condoms, and the rate of withdrawal going up, which is just pulling out, there's an issue at UMBC specifically, which is my contribution to the literature after doing 2 literature reviews for this project specifically. And with that, if you have any questions, I will take them now.
Great for timing, plenty of time for questions.
Yes.
How does this research relate to the field?
So in sociology and psychology, we're looking at the different barriers for why students don't use contraception. But it doesn't go further into saying how to fix that problem, which is why both literature reviews were necessary.
So let me try reframing the question. Where is your project at relative to other university campuses that are tackling the question of condom usage?
I couldn't find anything related to specific colleges because every college approaches sexual health differently. If you look at religious schools like Loyola, they don't do anything like this at all. They don't have condoms available to students in residential halls. You have to go buy them, you can't get them for free, stuff like that. UMBC has those things that are accessible, but it doesn't fit into the literature.
Gotcha. I mean, Loyola you've mentioned. Any others? College Park, Hopkins, anything else you want to throw out there? Stanford?
Schools in the general vicinity like College Park and Hopkins all also have like peer programs. So the way that we have the peer education or the peer health promotion program, College Park also has one, Johns Hopkins also has one, but their interventions might not work here. And their interventions are pretty much the same as ours, where we just have programming the way that our peer health educators do, but they aren't consistent campaigns the way that I'm saying they should be.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the health services, do the adults at university just don't care? They don't care whether students are using condoms, they wish that sex would disappear. I mean,
I wouldn't say that they don't care, I just don't think it's a priority for them. When I go to University Health Services with an idea for a program or some sort of intervention or some sort of campaign, the usual response is like, you're going to make someone uncomfortable, or I don't know that you should put a penis on that poster, or I don't know that we should say those words explicitly, which was one of the problems that I mentioned in the sociology aspect, was the stigma attached to sex, where you're seeing the adults on campus who say it's important, right? They work at University Health Services, they do STI testing, but they're not making an active effort to get students to use contraception. Did that answer your question?
well, if they're all going to be uncomfortable, I have more questions.
Go for it.
So, is the rate of STIs going up on college campuses, or is there a health because I saw that trend, but that was about condom usage.
Yeah.
I was wondering about STI incidence.
So I'm not allowed access to information as to like what the rates of STIs are, because that would violate HIPAA. But I do have access to students talking to me and me talking to UHS. And when I do programming and we ask students, what do you think the most common STI is? And I can ask you guys right now, and someone's answer is going to be chlamydia and gonorrhea. But the most common STI is human papillomavirus, which can lead to cancer. And students don't know that, and we're not doing enough to actually talk about it. So I don't know that the rates of STIs are going up because I'm not allowed to have that information, but I do know that the misinformation involved with STIs is definitely pretty clear on college campuses. Yes?
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Here's a two-parter then.
Okay.
Firstly, did you bump into any anecdotal evidence of the university saying explicitly they don't put out tweets, for example, because they've had negative feedback from parents or family or students?
No, it's usually just been the person telling me no is uncomfortable with it. Not that they've said other people are, but when I've said like, we should do this, the response is like, oh, I don't know, but there's never really something to back it up.
There's never been an evidence, which may nix the next part, but I was just wondering if theoretically the same framework of image preservation could be applied to an institution to help navigate, if there ever were a place where the institution said, we don't feel comfortable putting these tweets out and launching this campaign. Does that framework hold for an institution, or is it really targeted at students?
I think it holds for an institution as well. This isn't, while the research that I looked at targets young people, we know that the threshold for what embarrasses you, it reaches a certain point in adolescence and young adulthood, but it doesn't go away completely.
Okay.
So if we're still trying to combat the stigma and tell people that they shouldn't be uncomfortable with this, that still applies to adults or real adults or people in a higher position than we are.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah.
So Kayla, do you think that UHS is just hoping peer educators are doing like what you're doing? And
Yes.
that it's really just
Yes.
they leave it up to you guys.
Yes, pretty
so
much.
they're basing it on what you're hearing on campus, what the buzz is that you're.
Yeah, all of the contraceptive work that is done on or the work that targets contraceptive use is done by the peer health educators. If UHS's stamp is on something, it's because we do it and we work under UHS. So if they're, like the last tweet, I think, by UHS talking about condoms was promoting the condom cake-off, which I started 2 years ago, and we do it annually. So that's the only long-term intervention that targets contraceptive use, and it's run by peer health educators. Yes.
Could you give us a couple examples of where in your literature search the literature affirmed what you already knew as a peer health educator, and something in the literature that flew in the face of what you thought you knew as a peer health educator, using some of your sources that you named?
So with Bell, why embarrassment inhibits the acquisition and use of condoms, that focused on qualitative research, talking to students who were talking about that embarrassment. So like, I don't want to get condoms from the front desk of my res hall because people are going to be staring at me, which is something that I've heard in talking to other students when asked, where are you going to, where do you get your condoms? Do you want to get your condoms from somewhere else? We also looked at the FAIR literature, interpersonal barriers to condom use. That also talked about the self-image preservation. So being worried that people are going to think that you are inexperienced because you might